Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Good to see you again, Eric.
Bob, once again, into whether it's the breach or into the fray, here we go. So the last show, we touched on a number of topics, one of which actually was a semi-review, not really, on Straight Outta Compton.
Right.
And we talked about how well it had articulated all the grievances and all the problems that most African Americans faced in urban America at the time that the group NWA came into being.
Right.
And so we gave it great points for doing that quite well and for telling a decent rags to riches Horatio Alger story. But as you and I since discovered, a number of people sent us some emails, and my daughter and daughter-in-law actually said they were never going to support Straight Outta Compton in any movie theater because they were quite well aware of something that we weren't, which was the fact that members of NWA, in particular Dr. Dre, had been seriously misogynistic and actually had physically assaulted at least one female that we know about publicly, and there are rumors and probably stories that they had been that way towards other women.
Right.
And so even though we were giving them points for doing a good job of storytelling to a certain degree, the storytelling wasn't complete.
Right, and you and I had this discussion, and we were rather upset of the whitewashing of, basically the truth in how in his relationships with some of the women that NWA dealt with, and some of it is really pretty bad, pretty low grade. I mean, I'm just trying to pick my words carefully here.
I hear you, but the bottom line is, according to the reports I've since dug up, there was a host of a hip-hop television show named Dee Barnes, and the show was called Pump It Up. Remember the old Pump Up the Volume? Well, the show was called Pump It Up, and because she'd done an interview with Ice Cube around the time, 1990, somewhere around there, that NWA did not like, Dr. Dre physically assaulted this female in a bathroom in some nightclub to the point where she still suffers from migraines and all kinds of physical problems and psychological problems, etc.
So, and I heard that. Basically, the mental scarring never went away. And to see this movie come out, and like you said, even we took it as a Horatio Alger type movie, not knowing this little bit of sordid history.
Yes.
And for that, we have to take away point for simply walking around that in the movie as if it didn't exist.
Yeah.
The movie, you saw it.
Yeah, I went to see it specifically because I wanted to see how they dealt with the time period and all those issues that are still with us today. And so I was gratified about how well they had done that, but in not knowing the full, quote, backstory of what had gone down, we have to come back and reassess our assessment of Straight Outta Compton. Yes, they get big points for telling it like it is regarding the conditions and how things were. They get 0 points for whitewashing a serious assault against women that they perpetrated, at least one of them, for the record. So you take it from us, films we're seeing not as a true story, but as a sort of half story.
As a decent insight into the period. And you said it was pretty good. It makes you understand the period, if nothing else. If you're too young to have gone through it. And the birth of gangster rap and the conditions that could actually foment that.
Okay. So segueing from Straight Outta Compton to another film that's now out, folk. When you see this on next Monday, or what's our date? That would be today's, something like the Monday the 7th, 8th, something like that. Today being the 3rd.
Right. I'll look it up while you're going over the...
Well, next Monday, when you see this, as you are watching it, at the Film Forum, there will be playing still the Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, now carried as a Stanley Nelson film, and it's another look at the historical period. On a Vanguard of the Revolution is a good subtitle because the Black Panthers indeed were the revolutionary group that came out of the same earlier period of racial uprisings in America in the late 60s and early 70s.
Right, basically a community seeking to support and protect itself, where it knew it wouldn't get any support or protection from the authorities.
Yeah,
And
they
for
understood that they were within their rights. As the law was written in the state of California, they were able to carry arms openly, and they understood the law perfectly, and they did carry those weapons, and they made sure they had those weapons with them when there were police stops in their community. Police stops that normally would have escalated into all kinds of brutality against those being arrested. All of a sudden, police didn't feel so free to be brutal when armed black men were standing around watching them perform their job.
Sure.
So that is a film that's also a sort of not biopic. It's a documentary. It's not a fiction-based thing. And I believe, if memory serves me correctly, Kathleen Cleaver initially started this project a number of years ago, and it was percolating and stalled, and St. Clair Bourne tried to step in and assist, and then St. Clair passed, and then it floundered some more, and then finally it got into Stanley Nelson's hands, and so Stanley and Firelight Media sort of worked.
He resurrected it,
yeah,
but St. Clair Bourne did a lot of the...
I don't know how much St. did, because I know he and Kathleen sat down, talked, and were talking about him putting it together, but then he passed.
Right.
So
and
it
I
took
met
a while.
him just briefly. He looked perfectly healthy. I met him briefly before he passed.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
Okay, and we air September 7th, and it'll be still at the Film Forum?
Film Forum. As a matter of fact, just be on the Film Forum, September 2nd through September 15th.
Okay.
And there probably will be a national release right after the 15th here in New York. I'm sure it's going to be at the Magic Johnson Theater, probably starting September 11th.
In that time frame?
So there'll be an overlap between the Film Forum and the Magic Johnson. And there is probably a Black Panther website. Yes, www.theblackpanthers.com. That website will probably give you the info on national release. And who knows, we might be able to get one of the filmmakers on Media Watch.
That would be helpful. Yeah, he might be in town
within the next couple of weeks. And possibly they may be here to talk about it. Can't promise, because they are probably on the circuit now.
And I'm sure they've been booked for months.
With pushing the film.
With their appearances,
yes,
sure.
Pushing the film. So, but we bring that to your attention because that's a history that you need to be aware of that's not properly taught. It's not taught at all, so this film will be definitely eye-opening for our viewing audience.
And you wouldn't get the history just by, say, looking at newspaper clippings, because that's not you wouldn't see that, you wouldn't see the other side of the story, unless you read the Amsterdam News or something like that. But you're not going to get the under the radar history.
Well done, because they have any number of still living Panthers who sat down for the interviews, and Kathleen Cleaver is in there, any number, Jamal Joseph is in there, any number of Black Panthers who are now on to bigger and better things, some of whom are now community activists. And you get to the heart of where the split came, how the FBI undermined them, how deep the informants was, and they don't whitewash the fact that Fred Hampton was assassinated in his bed in Chicago. They talk about it quite openly, and you see the fact that this was a deliberate attempt to destroy lives and destroy a movement by J. Edgar Hoover and the Nixon administration. So it's a film definitely worth seeing. And so with that as a segue about how conditions were in the 60s to how conditions 60s and 70s and 80s, and guess what, folks? The more things change, the more they stay the same. So tell me a little bit about what you heard about Kanye West and his announcement at the VMAs.
Well, I mean, and I'm not an awards type
person.
Yes, and I tend not to listen to what happens there. But Kanye has a history of making political statements that push the envelope, to say the least. If you remember during the Katrina quote rescue
debacle.
There we go.
The Katrina debacle.
And then there was a
Kanye was quite blunt.
Yeah, there was a fundraiser, and I think it was Jimmy Fallon was next to him. But anyway, they were doing these segments where these people would just stand up and
all these celebrities would say their piece.
About Katrina, and Kanye got up and said, "Bush doesn't like black people."
Good quote was, "George Bush don't like black people," something to that effect.
So,
well, at the VMA Awards,
well, he announced that he would be running for president in 2020. And here again, making a big statement at a venue where such statements are not expected, and he's good at that. He's good at drawing attention to himself. At the moment, he knows he has the audience.
Right.
And in some respects, and this is my opinion, stealing the audience rather than put on his own show and gathering his own audience. He'll take another show and use his opportunity to get a message across. But good or bad, that's
well, we mentioned
history.
Kanye running for president in 2020 because it gives us a chance to segue to the fact that another guy who likes to be bigger than life and to be bombastic and to utilize media platforms to his advantage is a fellow whose name rhymes with dump and chump and a few other synonyms to that effect.
I think my friend has it best. He has T.rump.
So I hadn't seen that one, but that's quite good. Mr. Trump actually thought that Kanye was one of his buddies and liked what Kanye had to say.
Yeah.
But the latest in Donald Trump's ongoing beef with the press is now his beef with Kareem Abdul Jabbar. And the interesting thing about that is because as much as we don't want to talk 2016 politics just because it's a year and so far out, but this guy that's gobbling up all the ether and is larger than life and is fighting with journalists left and right can't seem to be squashed or squelched, and so he keeps popping up. So Abdul Jabbar had written an essay talking about the difference between Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And the thrust of the essay was one man, he quoted Ernest Hemingway in the opening of the essay, Grace Under Pressure. And Bernie responded with Grace Under Pressure when the Black Lives Matter people took over his microphone. And Donald Trump responded to Megyn Kelly by threatening to assault her and not be nice to her, and et cetera, et cetera. And Kareem Abdul Jabbar went on in his essay to talk about Trump's assault on the First Amendment and the Fourth Estate. It was an interesting piece. And so that gets Bob and I to the section about journalists and how journalists cover these individuals. And for my money, they have not been doing a very good job of covering Donald Trump. But that's because, as Abdul Jabbar says in his essay, he usually attacks the journalists who don't say nice things about him quite personally. Give me some of your examples, Bob, of some of Donald Trump's, or even if you want to pick up on his assault on Abdul Jabbar.
Well, I mean, Kareem, and of course we all know him from his basketball career, but he's actually, for those who don't know, extremely very well educated. And he's been writing columns like this for a while. Yeah, and this is a very thoughtful column.
I think they carry him in the Washington Post. They carry him on a number of online outlets. And so basically, in his second career, he's as much a journalist as any columnist that's writing for writing any blog or writing any op-ed. It's like Charles Blow writing an op-ed for the New York Times.
Sure.
Kareem will show up writing an op-ed for somebody.
Right.
He's as much a journalist as we are.
I agree.
So basically, Donald Trump, when Kareem's essay came out, see if I can find that.
Yeah, while you do that,
printout.
let me just lift one graph from, and it's a subject that you and I covered already.
Go.
And Trump's vendetta against the press extended to the Des Moines Register. When the paper issued an editorial calling for Trump to withdraw from the campaign, he refused to give the paper's reporters credentials to attend his campaign event in Iowa in July. He also called the paper failing and very dishonest. Other journalists he thinks have treated him harshly he refers to as losers or unintelligent, as if the definition of the lack of intelligence is to not agree with him. That's his standard.
Right. And Kareem's answer to, I mean, Trump's answer to Kareem's column, let's see if I can read the scribble that's on the column, but this is Donald Trump's response. Kareem, now I know why the press always treated you so badly. They couldn't stand you. The fact is that you don't have a clue about life and what...
It's typed down here. I just noticed that.
The fact is that you don't have a clue about life and what has to be done to make America great again. Best wishes, Donald Trump. Well, this is his scribble that I was trying to read. His handwritten scribble that he sent. I don't know if you can see that.
And that's precisely the way he sent it to Kareem.
This is his stuff, right? And so that's another one of these ad hominem personal attacks on a journalist that disagrees with Donald Trump or takes a position that calls Donald Trump to task. But there are some other items in Kareem's column that makes, at least myself, I don't know where Bob is on this, but I didn't realize, I slept this, and I apologize to Media Watch viewers because we try to stay on top of key things when it comes to media and journalism. But when he banned the Des Moines Register from his events in Iowa, evidently, that seems to be a total ban, because I believe when he threw out Jorge Ramos at his last press conference about a week and a half ago, when we air this, a Des Moines Register individual had also been banned from that event. And so what that means is this individual has taken it upon himself to say which press entities can and cannot cover his events. Well, that is not acceptable in a free democracy where the press's job is to bring information as unbiased as possible to the general public. So for anyone, candidate, whatever, that's throwing a public function that the press is supposed to cover, is allowed to cover, to try to ban any individual journalist for any reason, except the person is totally out of control and not doing normal protocol, then that person should be anathema to the rest of the press.
I agree with that. Technically, a press event for a candidate is technically a private event. So technically, you can invite who you want. I'm just being devil's advocate for a second.
No, not if you are a declared presidential candidate who is having a forum that's discussing the issues that you are trying to bring to the general public. It becomes not a private event unless it's a fundraiser, because the fact that you've invited the press to come to this event because you want to get your views out, then that means you have invited the entire press.
I agree with that, but within limits. And here again, being devil's advocate, within limits, you can assign credentials to who you want to. When you're even presidential candidate, you can give out credentials here or not there. But to me, that defines you as a non-candidate. If you're just going to pick out the journalists that you want to deal with, then you're not really putting yourself out there. You're putting yourself in there with the people that I like, and that's not the way a real politician would deal with journalists.
I'll agree with the caveat that works when you're doing something like a convention, where you have to deal with X number of slots available to X number of press, X number of available space within a given confines of an area. And so therefore you actually have press credentials and you have to sign up, and they allocate them, but they allocate them to news organizations, across the board. They are limited so that if you don't have the credential, you can't get in.
Yeah.
But guess what? You don't say, well, I just don't like you, Fox News, so you're not going to get credentialed. You might only get one credential as
Right.
opposed to 4.
Exactly.
But you get a credential. And so that's why I'm saying that's the caveat where I will say, yeah, you might be able to say there are limitations.
Okay.
You're having a normal event, there's a press conference, you're on a run and gun campaign, even if it's a year and 8 months out or a year and 4 months out, then that's open to the press.
No, I agree with that.
So-
I'm just being extremely technical
I
there.
hear you.
I mean, if I'm a member of the press and he's telling me that I can't enter the room specifically because he doesn't like my paper, that's BS to me. I mean, and that's not the way that press conferences work. You're there to meet the press. You're not there to if you were there to pick out your friends, then you do that at a private meeting in a conference room.
Hey,
A press conference, you don't say, Jorge Ramos, you get out of here. Des Moines Registers, you can't have that table. But that's what he's doing.
That's what he has done, and what makes me livid about the entire thing is the rest of the press has allowed him to get away with that.
Right.
That's why I'm saying this is, for me, this is akin to when Ronald Reagan decided he was going to crush the air traffic controllers union and just said, okay, we don't like the fact that you're standing up for your rights. You're screwing up with what we think is the best way to run this country, and I don't care whether you're a union with rights to strike or not, we're going to bust you. And so Ronald Reagan, as the president, went ahead and did that, and the rest of the labor movement did not stand up for that air traffic controller union, and the union got busted. Guess what? The rest of them got busted in the long run because the backbone of the labor movement was decimated as a result of that particular, quote, incident. Teamsters could have shut down the country. They didn't. All the other ancillary unions could have supported those air traffic controllers, and they didn't.
Right.
And after that, it was like fair game on labor. And guess what? Labor has never recovered since, folks. Take that little history lesson from me and go look it up.
Yeah, I was trying to pick out the year, but I remember that it was a case where Reagan argued these are highly paid people and they need to just do their job and shut up. And I was surprised even as young as I was that he got away with that.
But the fact that New York Times, LA Times, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, none of those people came out and took Donald Trump to task for trying to ban the Des Moines Register from his events. That says to me that, as one of our resource people said, these people are only in it for the money. They don't care about their own profession, and they may be right. I was appalled at how sycophantic CNN was all last week or the week before, trying to cover Donald Trump with, oh, we're waiting for Donald Trump to arrive. His plane is about to come. We'll stay with you live. And it was the most sickening thing I'd seen in journalistic coverage in I can't tell you how long.
We don't have the same kind of camaraderie that we had in the 80s and 90s where reporters, or the 70s, where reporters would stick together on an issue like that. But even in the 90s, I believe there was a case where a New York police commissioner tossed one reporter out of the room. And I heard about it later, and I had a friend who was not even in journalism anymore, but he was shocked that the rest of the room didn't get up and leave
walk out
when he did that.
Yeah.
And we're having the same thing
This is
today,
ridiculous.
25 years later or so.
All right, so we're going to, again, take the press to task as we segue to another story that's been in the news for a week now. It's dying down, except that, let's see, get the name correct, the father of one of the two journalists who was slain on television. The headlines, ex-broadcaster kills two on air in Virginia shooting, takes own life. That particular story, Roanoke, Virginia.
At WDBJ.
Yeah. The way the story has been covered is the way we want to approach it. But the interesting thing is one of the two reporters on air, Allison Parker, her father basically came right out after his daughter was slain and announced he was going to launch his campaign to try to get some common sense as far as background checks, gun laws, pressing for a much more sensible gun policy in this country. And of course, he's been assaulted verbally
Oh, yeah.
and
Sure.
flayed by the NRA. And so the latest development on that story is his ongoing crusade on the gun issue and the NRA's pushback. But what I want to get us to get into is the difference in coverage on shootings and perpetrators, because they happen a week apart, and it's the obviousness of the difference in coverage is significant, because the week before the Roanoke, Virginia shooting, where those two individuals were shot, and what made that so shocking was because the shooter filmed it himself as he was doing it, so you had this horrific video that popped up on social media, and most people, once they realized what it was, took it down and did not reprint it. But the shock of seeing two young people, vibrant individuals, killed was more than people could really take. And so there was an outpouring of sympathy for them, and of course the shooter, because of whatever mental imbalance that he had, was basically not seen in the best possible light for taking two people's lives.
Sure.
But the week before that, there had been a similar kinds of shooting, in that the other headline was Fort Lee man ID'd as shooter at federal offices in New York City. And the week before,
And this was down on Varick Street in the same building, if you know it in New York, where you get your passport on the other side of the building. He basically walked in and he had a beef because he had been fired from his job in a federal agency a few years ago. He basically walked in the building and took out the first person he saw, which was a security guard who was right at the door.
The problem is how those stories are reported.
Right, and we have about a minute left.
Yeah, so we got to do this real fast. The opening paragraph, and we took two New York Times stories as examples. In the Roanoke shooting, the first paragraph is, he was a fired television reporter with a history of conflicts at work and rage apparently stoked by racial grievances. And when he sought revenge on Wednesday, gunning down two former colleagues, he used the tools of social media to ensure that his crime was broadcast live, recorded from multiple angles, and posted online.
And
that's
the
the
other
opening
guy
graph.
was described as...
And the opening graph for the previous shooter was a Fort Lee man who had been trying to get his job back for years after being fired from the U.S. Department of Labor, claiming a whistleblower complaint that garnered assistance from two North Jersey congressmen, walked into a New York City federal building on Friday and fatally shot a guard before killing himself, according to authorities.
So he was humanized, the other guy wasn't, and it's a whole two different ways to approach the similar story.
Similar stories.
So
you notice the difference in the opening paragraph. So
we have about 10
depends on who
seconds.
tells the story, how they tell it. We'll pick up on this the next time. This has been Media Watch. I'm Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Good
We'll
talking to you.
catch you the next time. Thank you, MNN and EBT Educational Production.